I watched in frozen horror as my sister's wheelchair tilted back, slipped from Karen Mitchell's grip, and tumbled down our front steps with a sickening thud. Emily screamed as she landed hard on her side, the metal frame clattering violently against the concrete. I sprinted forward, heart pounding, but I was too late. Karen stood at the top of the steps, arms crossed, expression unbothered. "Well, that was unfortunate," she said, brushing imaginary dust off her palms, like she dropped a napkin instead of nearly crippling someone. She didn't even glance at Emily, who lay trembling in pain at the bottom of the stairs. My blood boiled. I dropped to my knees beside Emily, checking her for injuries, my hands shaking with rage. Her face was contorted in pain, one arm cradled against her side, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Karen," I growled, "you just injured my sister." She blinked slowly, feigning confusion. "I didn't push her. She fell because that ramp you installed was unauthorized and unsafe. If you'd followed proper HOA procedure, none of this would have happened." The gall, the sheer audacity. She had no idea. Karen Mitchell thought she was dealing with just another homeowner she could bully into submission with her smug HOA rules and fake smiles. But what she didn't know was that I was a federal judge. Not just any judge. I specialize in discrimination cases, with zero tolerance for abuses of power, especially those that prey on the vulnerable. Until today, I had kept my career separate from my quiet suburban life in Oakwood Estates. I kept my head down, paid the dues, trimmed the hedges, tolerated the ridiculous HOA memos about mailbox heights and lawn gnomes, but this was something else. This wasn't about aesthetics or rules. This was about humanity, about basic decency, and Karen had just made the worst mistake of her life. Because the moment she laid her hands on my sister and let that wheelchair slip, whether on purpose or through reckless indifference, she crossed a line she could never uncross. And she was about to learn, the hard way, that some rules carry consequences far greater than fines. Some actions wake up the very force people like her fear most. Just 6 months before that horrific afternoon, I had welcomed my sister Emily into my home after the car accident that changed her life. She had always been fiercely independent, a teacher with a passion for literature and a dry wit that could cut through any awkward silence. But the spinal injury left her wheelchair-bound, and suddenly her world shrank to wherever ramps and access points allowed her to go. I didn't hesitate. I converted my home office into a bedroom for her and built a temporary wooden ramp off the front steps so she could move in while we waited for the contractor to install a permanent one. The city had approved everything. Permits, medical documentation, contractor timelines, they were all in order, but that didn't matter to Karen Mitchell. Not anymore. I had lived in Oakwood Estates for 8 quiet years before Emily moved in. An HOA had always been strict, the kind of place where neighbors report each other over mailboxes being 1 inch too tall. Still, it was manageable, even tolerable under the previous board president. But everything changed 3 months ago when Karen was elected. From day one, she ruled with the smug certainty of someone who thought power made them righteous. At first, it was the usual pattiness, passive-aggressive notes about my grass being too long by half an inch, citations for leaving my trash can at the curb a few minutes past the pickup window. I could handle those. I had handled worse in federal court. But then she discovered the ramp, and everything escalated. She brought it up during the next meeting like she had uncovered some criminal conspiracy. "That ramp is an eyesore," she announced, tapping her manicured nails on the table, lips curled in disapproval. "It diminishes our property values and must be removed immediately. No exceptions." I calmly explained that it was a temporary structure, entirely permitted, and necessary for my sister's mobility, while we awaited the permanent installation. I showed her every document city permits, medical notes, contractor quotes. She didn't care. "Rules are rules," she said, with that dead smile of hers, the kind that looked warm from a distance but never touched her eyes. "Perhaps," she added, "if your sister's condition is that severe, she should consider a more appropriate living arrangement." That line stuck with me like a splinter. Not because it was cruel, but because of how casually she said it. Like Emily's presence in the neighborhood was an inconvenience, like she was a flaw to be painted over. I clenched my fists under the table and forced myself to breathe. I couldn't afford to lose my temper. Not yet. I had to stay grounded for Emily's sake. She needed calm, not conflict. But Karen didn't stop. Over the following weeks, she escalated her efforts. HOA notices began arriving twice a week. Threats of daily fines. Warnings of legal action for noncompliance. She came by personally once with 2 other board members in tow, measuring the ramp with a tape measure. Like it was some kind of crime scene. I caught her one morning walking past our house slowly, phone in hand, snapping pictures. When I stepped outside and asked if she needed something, she smiled sweetly. and said she was just documenting for the HOA records. That same smile every time, the fake one, like I was supposed to be impressed by her authority. Emily noticed it too. She felt it. Every time Karen appeared, Emily would go quiet, her shoulders tightening, her sense of safety evaporating. That's when I started parking my car closer to the ramp, just in case I needed to shield her. One morning, while helping Emily into the car for her physical therapy appointment, I saw Karen fast walking down the sidewalk with her usual clipboard. Behind her were 2 HOA board members trailing like lackeys. I groaned inwardly. Not today. Not now. We have an appointment, I told her as she approached. You'll have to schedule this. She stepped in front of the car. This won't take long, she said, waving a paper in her hand. The board has voted to take immediate action on structures that violate our community aesthetics. The way she said aesthetics made it sound like a crime against nature. I reminded her again that the ramp was permitted. She cut me off. Permits issued by the city, she said, not approved by the HOA Architectural Committee. She handed me the notice like she was performing a civic duty. You have 24 hours to dismantle this structure or we begin daily fines of $200. Emily placed a hand on my arm. James, we're going to be late. I nodded, forcing my jaw to unclench. We'll talk later, Karen. There's nothing to discuss, she said, her smile icy now. The ramp comes down, or the fines begin. I backed out of the driveway, her smug expression burning into my rearview mirror. On the drive, Emily tried to distract me with jokes about how she should start a tally of Karen sightings like wildlife. But even she couldn't mask the tension. That woman sees me as a problem, she said quietly. I hate feeling like I'm making life harder for you. You're not, I told her. She is. We were gone for almost 3 hours. The appointment ran late, and Emily's therapist added new stretches that showed promise. She was smiling when we pulled into the driveway. That smile vanished instantly. I slammed on the brakes. Our ramp was gone. Pieces of the wooden boards lay scattered in a pile on the lawn like discarded debris. A group of men contractors, maybe, were packing up their tools. Karen stood nearby, arms folded, her eyes practically glowing with satisfaction. What the hell is going on? I shouted. Karen turned slowly as if I had interrupted a relaxing afternoon. Enforcing HOA regulations, she said calmly. You were given notice. I was given 24 hours. It hasn't even been 12. The board determined this violation required immediate action, she said with a smirk. Section 8, paragraph 3 of the bylaws allows removal of unapproved structures that impact community aesthetics. I stared at the empty front steps, bile rising in my throat. How is my sister supposed to get into the house now? Karen shrugged. That's not the HOA's concern. You should have followed the rules. Emily sat silently in the passenger seat, stunned. Neighbors had begun gathering, watching from their porches or standing awkwardly on sidewalks. No one said a word. I need to get my sister inside, I said through gritted teeth. Karen checked her watch like she had a lunch to get to. My work here is done. Consider this a lesson in compliance. She turned to leave. Wait, I called. You can't leave us like this. How is Emily supposed to get inside? Karen sighed like I'd asked her to carry furniture. I suppose we can assist as a courtesy, she said, motioning to the 2 men. What happened next still plays on a loop in my head. Instead of guiding Emily carefully, Karen grew impatient. This is taking too long, she snapped, and before I could stop her, she shoved past the men, grabbed the handles of Emily's wheelchair, and said, Just lift it, it's not that complicated. Emily gripped her armrests, clearly frightened. Please be careful, she said. Karen didn't listen. She tilted the wheelchair backward to go up the first step and instantly lost her balance. I lunged forward, too late. The wheelchair jerked sideways, then backward, and Emily fell. I'll never forget the sound, the thud, the silence after. Karen didn't even move. Just stood there, annoyed. Well, that was unfortunate, and in that moment I knew this wasn't just about a ramp or an HOA rule. It was about power, about cruelty disguised as order. And Karen was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who's been quiet the longest. The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and quiet despair. Emily lay on the examination table, her face pale and drawn, her arm cradled against her body as the doctor gently rotated her wrist. She winced and tried to play it off with a weak smile, but I could see the pain she was holding back. The x-rays confirmed a sprained wrist and deep bruising along her ribs. It could have been worse, the doctor said solemnly. Wheelchair falls can be fatal, especially with pre-existing spinal injuries. I nodded, jaw clenched, barely hearing him. My mind was replaying the scene over and over, the snap of Karen's voice, the look of panic on Emily's face, the fall. When the doctor asked how it happened, I gave him the truth. Every detail. the unauthorized removal of the ramp, the reckless attempt to push the wheelchair up the stairs, the lack of any emergency plan, any assistance. His expression shifted from clinical concern to something colder. "That sounds like a potential ADA violation," he said. "Possibly assault, negligence at the very least. Have you considered legal action?" I stared at him for a moment, then exhaled slowly. "I'm considering all options." On the way home, Emily was quiet. She kept her eyes on the passing houses, her good hand gripping the armrest. I could feel the guilt radiating off her, as if this had somehow been her fault. I reached over and gave her hand a light squeeze. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said. "I should have known she'd take it this far." Emily looked at me, her voice barely above a whisper. "What will you do?" I tightened my grip on the wheel. "I'm done playing nice." That night I tucked Emily into bed and made sure she had everything she needed. Then I went to my office, closed the door, and picked up my phone. "Susan," I said when my clerk answered, "it's Judge Thompson. I need you to clear my docket for tomorrow. Family emergency. I also need you to prep a few things for me." She asked no questions. Susan knew my tone. This wasn't a delay. This was the start of something. After the call, I opened my home legal database and began gathering every relevant document: federal ADA guidelines, housing discrimination statutes, HOA liability precedents. It had been a long time since I'd had to apply them personally. But this wasn't just personal anymore. This was war. The next morning, Emily insisted on coming with me. Her wrist was wrapped, her ribs still sore, but she sat in that chair, with her back straight and her eyes steady. "I want to see it," she said. "I want to see how this ends." As we wheeled her out to the car, we saw a small group of neighbors gathered outside our house. Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street stepped forward holding a small casserole dish. "I figured you might need dinner later," she said softly. "I also wanted you to know I have security cameras on my porch. They caught everything. You can have the footage." I nodded, stunned for a moment. "Thank you." Her gesture wasn't just kind, it was evidence, and it meant someone had been watching, had cared. 4 other neighbors silently stepped forward and helped lift Emily and her wheelchair up the bare concrete steps and into the car. No one spoke much, but the message was clear. The tide was turning. Karen had made a mistake, a public one, and people had seen it. The HOA meeting that afternoon was held in the community center. Karen had called it herself. The agenda posted online less than 24 hours earlier with a vague title, "Emergency Discussion of Thompson Property Violations." We arrived 10 minutes early to a packed room. Folding chairs were filled, people lined the walls, murmuring and exchanging looks. Karen sat at the front table, gavel in hand, her expression sharp and self-satisfied. The moment she saw Emily enter, her smile faltered just a flicker, but it returned quickly. "Let's call this meeting to order," she said with dramatic formality, banging the gavel once. "We are here to address ongoing violations by the homeowner at Lot 42 and discuss the escalating hostility directed at the board." For the next 15 minutes, she painted me as an uncooperative, aggressive homeowner, complete with printed photos of the ramp, our front lawn, and even close-up shots of our trash bins, as if that somehow proved her point. She accused me of threatening her, of refusing to comply, of undermining community standards. She described the ramp as unsafe and unapproved, a danger to others. It was all delivered in the same measured, faux-concerned tone she used every time she wanted to sound reasonable while doing something monstrous. Finally, she looked out at the room. "Does the homeowner wish to respond?" I stood slowly and adjusted my tie. "Before I respond," I said, "I'd like to provide some context that Mrs. Mitchell has failed to mention." I nodded to Mrs. Rodriguez, who had come with us and was already waiting at the side of the room. She plugged her phone into the projector, the screen flickered to life, and the video began to play. It was clear, high-resolution footage from across the street, showing everything: Karen ordering the removal of the ramp, arguing with me when we returned, and most importantly, her grabbing the wheelchair handles and mishandling it until Emily went crashing down the steps. Gasps erupted around the room. Karen stood abruptly. "This is out of context," she said quickly. "I was trying to help." I raised a hand. "The context," I said calmly, "is that you illegally removed a medically necessary, permitted ramp and then recklessly handled a mobility device you clearly did not understand. The result was bodily harm. Emily's wrist is sprained. Her ribs are bruised, she is in pain, and let me be absolutely clear for those of you who don't know me. I've lived in this neighborhood for 8 years. I keep to myself. I respect the rules. That's why most of you don't know what I do for a living." I paused and looked directly at Karen. "My name is James Thompson. I'm a federal judge for the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. I specialize in cases involving housing discrimination and violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. You didn't just bully the wrong homeowner, Karen. You violated federal law." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's face went pale. A few people in the audience murmured. I turned back to the room. "Yesterday, my sister was injured due to the actions of this board and its president. That injury was not just physical. It was symbolic of what happens when people prioritize power over decency. But the law has something to say about that. The apology has no authority to override federal accessibility requirements, and Mrs. Mitchell's actions may constitute not only ADA violations but assault and criminal negligence. I am prepared to file suit if necessary, or we can resolve this now." Karen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. One of the board members leaned over and whispered something to her. Then he stood up. "I move that we reinstate the Thompson ramp effective immediately and issue a formal apology to the Thompson family." "All in favor?" Hands went up, nearly every one of them. Karen didn't even vote. Her hand shook on the gavel. I watched her realize, in real time, that her authority had evaporated, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes, not because she'd been caught, but because now she knew exactly who she had crossed. Karen did not resign right away. She sat there at the head of the table after the vote, gavel clenched in her hand like a lifeline, her knuckles white, face blank except for the twitch in her jaw. The crowd had gone quiet again, the kind of quiet that settles in right after a storm, when everyone is trying to process what just happened. I watched her, wondering if she'd lash out or double down. Instead, she stood slowly, straightened her blazer, and addressed the room with a forced calm. "I see this community has made its decision," she said. "I will consider my position and respond accordingly." Then she walked out, head high, spine stiff, but the air around her had changed. The Queen of HOA had just lost her crown, and everyone knew it. I stayed behind to answer questions. Several neighbors came up to shake my hand or apologize for not speaking up sooner. One older man, a veteran who lived 3 doors down, told me that Karen had fined him for flying his American flag 2 days past Memorial Day. Another couple said they had considered moving because of how oppressive the HOA had become. It was like a dam had broken. People were no longer afraid. As Emily and I left the meeting room, Mrs. Rodriguez caught up to us and handed me a flash drive with the full video footage and a backup copy. "I figured you might need more than just one angle," she said with a wink. That night I submitted a formal complaint to the Department of Housing and Urban Development and forwarded a full case summary to the U.S. Attorney's Office. But I wasn't done. I had one more card to play. The next morning I called in a favor. A colleague at the DOJ confirmed what I suspected. The HOA's financial records had been sloppy for years. I requested a forensic audit under suspicion of embezzlement and misappropriation of HOA funds. Within a week, federal marshals arrived at Karen's front door with a warrant. Neighbors watched as they entered her home and emerged hours later with boxes of documents and digital evidence. Word spread fast. By the end of the week, Karen was arrested and charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, financial misconduct, and ADA violations. It turned out she had been funneling HOA funds into personal accounts under the guise of administrative expenses, travel reimbursements that never happened, overpriced landscaping contracts with shell companies she secretly owned, and even a luxury spa retreat listed as a wellness planning conference. The cherry on top was the violation that started it all, the unauthorized removal of an ADA-compliant ramp and the resulting injury of a disabled resident. That one charge alone came with serious federal consequences. Karen's attorney tried to spin it as a misunderstanding. But the evidence was overwhelming. Videos, emails, testimonies. My courtroom experience helped ensure every detail was airtight. She had nowhere to hide. At sentencing, the judge ordered 2 years in federal prison, restitution of the stolen funds, and a permanent injunction banning her from ever serving on a homeowners association board again. Karen looked smaller than I'd ever seen her as she was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. No blazer, no gavel, no clipboard, just a woman who thought she was above the law, now face to face with the justice she never saw coming. Back in Oakwood Estates, things changed fast. The remaining HOA board members resigned within days. A new board was elected, one focused on transparency, accessibility, and actual community. They voted unanimously to create an accessibility improvement fund using the recovered money from Karen's accounts. Our ramp was not only reinstated but upgraded into a permanent structure with additional features Emily needed. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now dropped by with food, flowers, or just kind words. The house felt warmer, safer, like a place we belonged. But the biggest surprise came 6 months later. One quiet morning I received a letter in the mail, handwritten in perfect cursive. It was from Karen. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside she wrote about her regret, her ignorance, and the slow realization of the damage she had caused. She admitted that she had mistaken rules for justice, that she saw herself as maintaining order when really she had been enforcing cruelty. She wrote that watching the courtroom proceedings had been the first time she truly understood what power wielded without empathy looked like. Her final line stuck with me. "I thought I was pushing your sister down those stairs, but I see now I was the one headed for the fall." I folded the letter and placed it in my drawer, not out of forgiveness, not yet, but maybe one day, because justice had already been served, not just in court, but right here, in the heart of our community. The days after Karen's sentencing felt surreal. For months she had stalked the neighborhood with her clipboard and fake authority, lording over everyone like a self-appointed queen. Now she was just another name in a court file, another headline on the HOA bulletin board under the notice, "Interim President Appointed." But the story didn't end with her arrest. It began something bigger. The new board moved fast. With overwhelming support from the community, they launched an accessibility fund using the money recovered from Karen's embezzlement. Emily's ramp was rebuilt, not just as a basic structure, but as a fully integrated part of our front entryway, safe, elegant, and compliant with every code under the sun. The fund also went toward building a small community garden with raised beds that wheelchair users could access, and adding ramps to the clubhouse and pool area, places that had been quietly inaccessible for years. For the first time since Emily had moved in, I saw her smile without hesitation. She joined the gardening club. She helped host a movie night in the now accessible clubhouse. She belonged. The woman who once felt like a burden to the neighborhood had become a bridge between people who had barely spoken to each other before. Neighbors started talking again, not just about bylaws and fines, but about real things. Community barbecues came back. Kids rode their bikes without parents nervously checking for HOA patrols. People stopped being afraid. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the rooftops, Emily turned to me with a half smile. "You know," she said, "I thought I was the reason everything went wrong, but maybe I was the reason it finally got better." I didn't say anything right away. I was too busy feeling the truth of it settle in my chest. She was right. Her fall had exposed rot no one wanted to see, and her strength, her refusal to be invisible, had forced everyone to reckon with it. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a community meeting about disability rights and housing law. Standing at that podium looking out at a room full of faces I now knew by name, I told them, the one thing Karen never understood: rules without compassion are just tools for cruelty. The law is meant to protect people, not punish them for existing. That's why I do what I do. That's why I stayed quiet for so long. I thought this place could stay untouched by the harshness of the world. But justice doesn't live in a courtroom alone. It lives in the courage to speak up when something is wrong. It lives in the neighbor who offers her security footage without hesitation. It lives in the people who stop being silent just because it's easier. After the meeting, a young couple approached me with their son, who used a wheelchair. They had been planning to move. Now they said they were going to stay. That, more than any courtroom victory, felt like real justice. And maybe the most unexpected twist of all came one quiet Sunday, when I found another letter on my doorstep. No return address, just my name in sharp black ink. Inside was a single sentence: "Thank you for teaching me that power without empathy is just fear wearing a badge." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. Karen's fall had been steep, but maybe somewhere in that descent, she'd finally found something real. I didn't keep that letter in a drawer. I burned it, not out of anger, but closure. The story was done. Justice had been served, not just with indictments and fines, but with change. Lasting, tangible, human change. And as I looked out across the street at the ramp that now glowed under the porch lights, I knew one thing for certain. We hadn't just won a battle. We had rebuilt something better from the ashes.